Just to quickly give my background and Winnie will give hers. Together, along with some of our team members, we have a company called Wolf at the Door Studios, which produces fiction audio drama primarily. That's really our true love and our focus. My background is more on the sound as storytelling side. So I come from a music background, then into sound design, and then into the dark and evil world of advertising. And then found my passion with audio storytelling. And Winnie?
Yeah, so my background is more as a development exec in film and television. And so I did that for a very long time and then fell in love with audio storytelling as well. And so, I come from more of like a, how do we sell this? How do we pitch this? But then also marrying that with sort of how do we do the best audio storytelling we can do?
And so, based on our backgrounds and our roles, we're also husband and wife, by the way. And Wolf the Door is a little, mom and pop shop. And so when I first wanted to get into fiction podcasting, the first thought that crossed my mind is like, wow, I would really love to do this. It's what I listen to. I love this sort of DIY indie resurgence of audio drama, but I have no idea how to put together a story. And Winnie was like, well, what do you think I do? That's literally what I do for a living. So the marriage of her expertise in, I think, what we would call the traditional entertainment industry milieu and formats and structures of both storytelling and pitching story has been something that I've relied on and learned from and misused along the way to, sort of build our strategy. So the format of this conversation is going to be me, the idiot, not knowing anything, asking Winnie, the expert, about how to pitch audio drama.
And please, if you have questions along the way, put them in the Q&A chat, and we want it to be a back and forth and a conversation. So if anything is confusing or you want to go a little bit more in depth, let us know.
Yeah, and we can't see you, so we're not even sure you're there. It seems like, Winnie, when it comes to pitching, there's sort of two fundamental elements of it. One is this deck thing that you build, and then one is an actual, you got the meeting and you have to go in and pitch or do it over Zoom, really. I think that from what I've learned, frequently the deck comes first and the pitch often is built off things that you've said in the deck or the world that you've put together in the deck. So I thought maybe we'd start off by talking about the deck.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on your own process. It can go both ways. So like for me, when I'm trying to put an idea together, maybe it's just my background of like trying to organize and like, distill thoughts, but I like usually put it into a deck. So that's sort of why the deck comes first for me, because it helps me to really condense the amount of information and make it more visual, and helps you get the tone and the feel because you're picking out like whatever Canva, template or whatever. And so then you have sort of a backbone and a structure to be able to go more in depth. But I do also know people who start and then they kind of just have all of it trickle out into a document, and then they sort of try to make sense of that, and then sometimes the deck comes afterwards. So you can really do it both ways, but I think I like to go from like simpler to more complex.
Well, I'm with you. I like to start with the deck in hopes that I never have to have a face-to-face meeting because people, make me nervous. So talking about the deck then, the idea that we'll start the conversation with, okay, if we're going to pitch a story, we'll start by building a deck. It seems like there are some things that change deck to deck, but largely there are elements that stay the same every time. So first we're going to have our title page. Next, we're going to have a log line. Let's talk about log lines a little bit. They are difficult.
Yes, I think log lines are one of the most important like marketing and pitch tools that you have, because no matter no matter where you're pitching, like the log line is the first thing that they're going to read, right? Is okay, so what is this really about? And so I think for log line, spending a good amount of time refining that so that A, it has all the pieces of information you need, B, it's sticky and it hooks the exec who's going to be hearing the pitch to be like, oh, that's cool, I've not heard that before, kind of situation, right? Because then will spur them to hopefully set the pitch, and if the pitch is great, buy the project down the road. And I think like the elements of the log line are, obviously who's the main character, it's the conflict and the stakes. And so you want to make sure to include all of those things in the log line. And it's good to have multiple versions of the log line, I think, or like work through multiple versions. And like it's just, you want to make sure that all of the pieces of the log line are there and working together, and they also reflect the tone of your story. So if it's a comedy, it's great if the log line has a little bit of comedy elements in the way you describe the character, but you also want to make it, the difficulty is having it be too big, but also you want to condense it down, right? You want to have all the information, but not have it be super long. It should be very digestible.
Well, I think the 3 points that you nailed there, like the character, stakes, and conflict, are really great guideposts. And in the world of podcasting in particular, having a great log line early is a huge boon, because eventually if you make the show and then you go to fill in the little, as you're posting it, fill in all the information that will then go up with the episode online, that log line will live there and be the thing that either attracts or does not attract your audience. So, I mean, it could be tweaked, obviously, from a log line that's directed towards industry execs, where maybe you're trying to front and center certain aspects of the story, and then for the audience, it's slightly different. But yeah, that log line will live with you for a long time, and I feel like, say, with the first show that we did, The Imperfection, we reworked and have still kind of tweaked the wording of that log line over and over again, but it does it has withstood the test of time in terms of helping people understand the show in a nutshell in about 3 sentences. And I think 3 to 4 sentences is where you want to be.
Oh, like I think it's ideally like 1 to 2 sentences. Like shorter is always better, right? Like, people don't have great attention spans.
Does anybody have any questions about log lines and what we're talking about when we say log lines?
Sort of just the distillation of your show in like 1 to 2 sentences that tells them tells the audience, tells the executive, tells agents what your show's about.
Yeah. And I understand that a log line feels necessarily artificial because it's so incredibly. Can we share an example? Let me grab the Imperfection log line. Where would I find that? Somebody changed it to advertise somebody else's show.
You should be able to share your screen.
Yeah, unfortunately, somebody tweaked it. Shoot, I'm sorry. I'm going to find that on a different machine, and we'll send a follow-up. But we can send a couple of examples. Can you just make one up? Sure. With the Imperfection, it was something along the lines of Charlie and Amber suffer from a rare disorder that causes them to wildly hallucinate. When their psychiatrist goes missing, they have to team up with the other patients to go find him and find themselves in a conspiracy that's even crazier than they are. That's it. So that essentially does cover the entire arc of the season. And it tells you, the show's about mental health, that there's a buddy comedy, and it's going to get weird. So I think that, again, we've tweaked the wording of that to go in search of, to find along the way. It's, was not a good branding exec and said, oh, we find one, we stick with it every time and it never changes. That's just not my forte.
Okay, so I found another one. So if you look at the Wizard of Oz, maybe something that everybody knows, right? It's a little bit easier to think about. So when a lonely Kansas farm girl is hurled by a tornado to a magical land, she goes on a dangerous journey to find a wizard with the power to send her home, right? So you want to have like a flawed main character. She's a lonely Kansas farm girl. She finds, community with the lion and the, Tin Man and, whoever. So when the flawed main character, and then you want to have your inciting incident, which is the tornado, right? Like tornado takes her house to Oz. Then you want to add the goal. So then her goal is to find the wizard, and then the stakes, which is sending her home. She wants to get home. So that's like the basic elements of the log line in a story. Like when you sell it, you want to zhuzh it up a little bit probably, but there's like those basic elements, put it together to tell exactly what the journey of the character is.
That's interesting, because that is exactly what the one for Imperfection does too, right? So when flawed main character meets inciting incident, they have a new goal in order to achieve certain stakes.
And so these are much more like story oriented, mostly for the writer. And so like, I think when you want to use it as a sales tool, you want to, use more evocative words and things like that. But just to understand like what each element is, I can give you a few more. So for The Hangover, when three mismatched groomsmen lose the groom during a drunken night in Vegas, they must retrace their steps to find him before his impending wedding. And there's When Harry Met Sally. When a crass womanizer hitches a ride with an uptight girl from college, they embark on a 10-year friendship and unexpectedly fall in love. Taken. When his estranged daughter is kidnapped in Paris, a retired CIA agent relies on his old skills to save her and redeem himself as a father. So if you look at like the, sort of character description, right? Like you kind of want to avoid using names, I think, if you can, because you want to build archetypes within, the mind of the person who's reading it. It gives you a lot more like imagination of like what that character could be if you say what that person is versus like their name, right? So a retired CIA agent means like, oh, he's out of the business, but now he has to come back in, and use his skills, right? So putting the descriptor with the character archetype or whatever they are in the story, you want to make sure that's like giving you irony or some sort of conflict in that comparison as well.
Cool.
Yeah,
that's a lot on log lines. It's a whole dark art, and there's lots to read on that. So I think, if anybody else has any other questions on that, but the next headline page in a deck could be the synopsis, or would you go into like world and tone first?
Again, decks are all different, so it doesn't really matter. Just sort of just the flow of what you feel like is most important. So if the world is like a big sci-fi world where it's going to be very hard to understand the story, if you don't understand what is happening in the world, then you would probably do world first.
Right. So the idea of putting a page that's called world is if you are setting up a universe that has rules, right? There's magic, but the magic only works on Tuesdays after midnight, or the werewolves turn like this, but they don't turn like that. It's a good place to describe those rules that are going to make the synopsis to come make sense. But it's also kind of a harder thing to write because you doesn't want to be more than a paragraph. you want to keep it exciting and easy to digest. But in your own head, it may be really central to what you've been building and really nuanced and important. So finding that balance between making it very readable and easy to understand and just hitting the key points is fine. You know, less is more. A good exec will understand, oh, there's rules to this world that are essential. That's a whole kind of storytelling. People that work in the industry definitely understand that that's a methodology. It exists. There's a way to approach it. There's a project that I'm working on right now with I'm directing for Audible with Higher Ground and Monkey Paw, and it's a sci-fi thing. And I'm not part of the writing team on that, but we have all been sort of contributing to giving notes and tweaking the outline. And it's very interesting seeing how much, you know, people who are really experts in worlds that have rules like Monkey Paw, you know, either push to forefront that part of the story or background it to let the character shine. It's subtle, you know, it's not one or the other. It's just about sort of where you focus the camera a little bit.
So we have a question. How do you differentiate a pitch deck versus a show Bible? In your experience, how do you utilize each? That's a really good question. So I think for pitch deck, it's mostly a sales tool. You know, people, it's kind of funny because they're like, why do you need a pitch deck if it's like, that's visual, if like, it's just audio, right? Like sometimes people think that, but I do believe that like when you show people images, like it can explain a lot for you.
Right.
To an exec that you don't need the words anymore. And now pitches, God, like they used to be 30 minutes, but now like you have to finish in 10 minutes. So like people just don't have attention anymore. So they're just crunching down the amount of time that they want to listen to somebody talk for nonstop. And so the images, I think, can do a lot of heavy lifting. So I think the pitch deck is more of a sales tool in a lot of ways. And a show Bible is more if you sell it, if you sell the idea, then they're going to say, okay, now what is the show? And it usually comes after the sale where, and it doesn't mean that you don't have some version of that because you need it in order to pitch, but that basically has, you know, really detailed character descriptions. It has every single episode, what the structure is. It could have, you know, future seasons and ideas for that. So a show Bible is just another level of like detail and like, and sort of completeness and fleshing out your show.
Right. I would say that the deck will necessarily leave some unanswered questions for an exec about, well, okay, I get the overall idea. Now, when the rubber meets the road, how do we make this? What's the final version of this look like for you? And that's where the pitch comes in. And then if that all goes well, you would sort of take all the information in your deck, move it into a Google Doc. So now it's just a A4 format document with no images, and expand on each character. You expand your synopsis to each episode, and particularly those rules about the world would go in much greater depth there. And you wind up with a document that, let's say, you know, Winnie and I came up with an idea, we pitched it, it worked out, but now we're going to bring in 2 other writers to write with us. This would be the thing that we'd all use to say, well, this is how you write this show.
Yeah. So yeah, that like the original reason why, you know, show Bibles were written is for TV shows. The creator would write that and then give it to the writers on the show to be like, here's everything you need to know. Right. So it is, you know, more of a document to like actually write and create the show. Although some version of that probably is necessary, it may be more truncated one for pitching. So you would expand upon your sort of pitch to include a lot more information that you want everybody to know in more detail.
Right. Great question. Awesome. So back to our deck, we have our awesome opening page. We have our log line. We have, if necessary, a quick paragraph on the world and how the world works. if we don't have a world, we might have a paragraph. The way I would do it would be to have a paragraph on tone. Um, I don't usually do both. If I'm doing something that's sort of magical or surreal and has rules, then I'll find a way to discuss the tone in there. And those rules kind of become this tone, but there's again a million different ways to do it. If I was doing a rom-com or a more straight drama, then tone is really important, right? What is it about the way you're going to tell this story that's going to set it apart and make it relevant to the audience that executive X might be looking to attract for their network? So when you're doing a tone paragraph, what are kind of your guideposts?
So I would say that the most like kind of shortcut way is like comps. So, you would say it has or you would just say like, oh, here are the 3 shows that it's like, and I think it's really good to always add a little line about like what in that show is comparative to your show. So the character relation, the sibling relationships of This Is Us, right? Or, if you have a sci-fi show, it's like the expansive alien world of Foundation or whatever, right? And like you would want to carefully craft the combination of usually people do 3. That's not 100% necessary, but I think that in a lot of ways that's the easiest way to describe the tone, is to see it has the elements of these things put together into this show, right? And then you can also sort of, if things are a little bit more mixed tone, which sometimes they are, you can expand a little bit more upon it if you want to. And I think it's really important to just sort of relay, like, for me, it's like a personal, like, why are you writing this and what are you bringing to it? As well, element where I feel like in the central part of the pitch, when you get to like actually pitching the show, you would always open with, okay, so here's the kinds of shows I've always loved, and this is why this idea came to me. And then being able to sort of describe the tone through the lens of like why you're excited about it is a really important part of it as well.
And that's something in my little outline here that I think I wanted to save for the end. So we're going to come back to the why are you the person to tell this story. There's a question, can you pitch a show that you've already released on Spotify? I don't think we're going to subject you guys to that right now. I mean, we're not prepared to do a full pitch. When we get ready to do a pitch, we practice. And it is something that we have written out word for word. And it's a song and dance.
Well, I did just send you a link to the Myco deck. Maybe we can just run through it. They want to see an example. Okay. So let's do that at the end.
So thank you for the question, but goodness.
Well, we can show you a deck that we put together for a show that we pitched.
Yeah. I meant, are companies willing to buy a show that's already been released? Oh, I see. You weren't dying to hear a pitch right now?
That makes more sense.
In our experience, no, which is weird because, if you look at Sundance, right, that's where the indie filmmakers go to sell their movies that they've made. And
I've heard, I haven't heard of this recently, but sometimes if a show is very successful, an indie creator will get a deal to make it for a platform, right? So to another season. So I have heard of that. I don't know that I've heard of that recently, but I don't know that they buy a show to put onto their platform that's already out.
Yeah, and Audible did a couple of those sort of like Night Vale present sort of things, or like they've tapped people that have successful indie shows to do spin-offs that are co-branded with the original show, but not on the exact same feed. So
we've also found that it's very difficult, to be honest, to sell a show that you've already made. Yeah. So, even if it's not released, if you have the whole show done and you go around and try and find a place for it, like I think most of the places that are making fiction want to have a hand in the making of it. So, they have to justify their jobs, right? Like if they could just buy shows, then they don't need them.
Uh, Here's a question. How does a one pager differ from a deck? What do you keep in versus leave out?
That's a really good question too. So I would say a one pager is just a really truncated version of the deck. So definitely log line. I would do a very short paragraph about like why you, and like what your personal connection to the story is. Very short quick character descriptions, and then maybe like a 1 or 2 paragraph synopsis, whatever you can fit, like a half page synopsis, whatever you can fit less on the page. That's like an even like more distilled version of whatever your show is, where you want to give them a sense of what it is, but include the most important details. I think something to think about when you're doing these in every circumstance is like, how can you use the most impactful words and the most impactful sentences, right? Because you could write a lot of things about a character. They love to wear white shoes on Tuesday. They love to go to the beach. They love to they're a gardener and they like roses. Like you could tell a lot of different things about a character, but I think understanding which details to reveal and that are going to help you tell your story and help people understand what your show is about is like really important as well, right? Because your character description could be a whole page long in itself if you wanted to.
And the thing that I've noticed, well, characters is next on our list here. So we have our log line, we have our world or tone, maybe both, depends. And then we get to character descriptions. And like I said, in our household, I will go and write something and then I'll show it to Winnie. And every single time I do character descriptions, she comes back and she's like, yeah, but what's their arc? And I'm like, oh, right. And that partially has to do with the way that I think of people in stories is they don't change very much. But in the world of storytelling and in the world of pitching a show to an exec, the thing they need to know from very early on in the discussion of the series is our hero or heroes change. How do they change? What changes about them? How central is that to who they are as a personality? And how does the plot points in the story, how do those become the drivers of that change, right? And you put those two things together and you get your theme for your show. So an example, again, I'll use the imperfection just because maybe some of us know it, but characters that have problems trusting reality need to trust each other. So through that, they learn how to trust and build a life of trust and get back to a state of healthfulness by using trust and friendship, and all the plot points in the story push them against their sort of dysfunction into an uncomfortable place of having to learn how to be friends and trust each other.
I think that brings up a good point that characters all tie to theme. So, another important thing to really think about, and if you have a one pager as well, is sort of like, what is this show about? Because everything stems from that, right? Like if you have like, a thesis statement of like what your viewpoint of the world is and what the story is exploring, then the log line, the world, the characters, everything sort of like has to come from that, right? That's like the lake where like all the little rivers come out of. Sorry. And so, like what Alex was saying about the characters is like, that's really what the show was about. But every character was struggling with that, right? And every character sort of lies on a spectrum of whatever that theme is. Like some are very trusting, some are not trusting at all, some are in the middle and go back and forth, right? And so having all your characters be variations on that theme is sort of how you build out your characters. They all have to tie into the theme.
The film Arrival is a brilliant example of that, where each of the main characters that are encountering this new alien species and trying to understand it come at it from completely different perspectives with different skill sets. And the backdrop behind that is that this is one group of people that are encountering these aliens, but it's also happening all at different countries all around the world. And their inability to communicate is so frustrating that it winds up creating conflict, and it looks like the world's on the brink of war because they can't communicate. And if you go back and look at that for theme and look at how the characters echo the theme, it's like a textbookly perfect example of how that works, right? Any other really good examples?
That's good. Let's go to synopsis.
I don't have it down here, but you brought it up, which is theme. I think in a deck or two, we have put a paragraph that says theme, where we'll say, you know, this story is about X. And how would you go about, if you felt like you needed to include a page on the theme of the show, how would you go about doing that?
I usually just have a few lines about it, so I will show you that. I think we should try and get through these and then show the deck. It'll be
Okay.
much easier.
So then synopsis frequently takes up, I think if you're talking about landscape format deck with images, it can take up 2 pages. Try to keep it to 1. And you're not breaking up the episodes. You're just going through the major story beats. Again, looking at, the plot points that really relate to theme and drive the change of the character.
So I think the best way to think about synopsis is like your entire show is a movie, right? And so like if you break it up into 3 acts, like in terms of movie structure, like what is the inciting incident? What's the thing that sets them off, which you will have in your log line? And then like end of act 1 essentially is a turn where they like go into this new world, right? So like what's the big turn at the end of act 3, which usually in a 8 or 10 episode series, like episode 3 or 4, but you don't want to I don't think you want to break it up into episodes just yet, right? This is sort of like I learned about something called the snowflake method, which I really love for like writing novels, where like you start with a log line, then you go to a paragraph, and then you go to 3 paragraphs, and then you go to you break out each paragraph into bigger paragraphs, and so you start small and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So like synopsis is really the first version of like your show, right? Of like what's going to happen. So end of first act, then there's a midpoint where everything kind of flips for the character, right? Not just the world, but they have some sort of revelation or something happens and that flips their mind upside down. And then end of act 2 is they think they get their goal, but it's not the right goal. And so then everything gets worse, right? And then act 3 is sort of the resolution and then the ending. So like,
I just want to jump in on that. So what she just did right there blew my mind the first time I heard it. And it still blows my mind every time you do it, which is there is this invisible skeleton that all of Hollywood industry execs know about how that 3-act structure works. And there are tons of great books on it in terms of learning that thing. I still fight against it with every fiber of my being, because I hope that in my ignorance, one day I will do something original. But it's worth noting that very simple breakdown of the 3-act structure is it is a language that execs speak and they know,
and they're looking for,
because
that means that you are a professional writer, if you know what that is. So
and it will move a story along at a pace that works.
And it helps you to organize your thoughts, right? Like it's much easier to build a story from different pieces than to just like be like overwhelmed and I can't do it, right? This is really a way for you to break it down into smaller pieces so that you can put it on the paper instead of thinking into space and then being like, I'm going to go eat something instead,
So that's a whole other webinar just on that, but I think it's really worth.
There's maybe 2 things to look at. I mean, everybody knows Save the Cat, right? It breaks it down very simply. Basically, there's every single movie you've ever heard of broken down online where the people have broken down Save the Cat structure. You can find a movie that like feels like your show and then look at that and sort of like help you to figure out what yours is from there and work backwards. There's also something called the sequence structure, and that breaks it down into 8, and then every sequence is a little movie. So that's another way to think about it. I think those are kind of like the 2 main methods that people use.
The last thing about our deck, which then I think we rework into our pitch, is the question of why are you the person to tell this story? It's always been and always will be important that the writer, the person making the show, is emotionally connected to the material, because that's going to make that's going to drive the whole project from this early stage of maybe we should make this, maybe not, all the way through to a finished product. So what do you think is the best way to express that essential question of, I'm the person to tell this story because?
I think I always ask, like, always ask writers where'd this idea come from? I think you can always tell a lot about the story from what the story came from. And like, oh, I read this article about this, or I was thinking about this in my life, right? Like, you always want to find some personal angle into it. And like, where is this story coming from? Why is it important to you? Why do you want to spend like many, many, many years of your life potentially trying to either get this made or out into the world? It's like so much work. It's so much work. It's thankless. You don't get paid that much, So like, why is this something that you have to put out into the world? Now, whether you like, I think for everybody that's personal, there's no formula to that either. But usually that ties into the theme and what you want to say about the world. It ties in the characters, why this character, it all stems from you. You're the one who's the storyteller, who it's coming from. And, being able to convince people that you have the right chops to be able to execute the story is a big part of selling the show. They are buying you, not necessarily the story, right? Like, yes, the story, but also like they're investing in you as a storyteller. So, and it's less like, oh, I did this and this and this before, like people don't
Right.
really care about that. It's not about a resume, right? It's about your life experience. It's about, I recently, I'm in a group, and this one woman, submitted a new idea of hers, and she was like, advocate for women who had been raped and like helps them in the hospitals and stuff. And she was working on a story about that. It was sort of like a mystery and whatever. Anyway, long story short, it's like she's going to bring a level of nuance, sensitivity, like, knowledge and like, real emotion to a very, very, very difficult topic to talk about, right? Like, it would be very hard to tackle that without that background.
Right.
And so, like, then I have another friend who's a writer, and she, like, when I met her, I remember her forever because she's like, oh, well, my pilot is about like her mom was an arms dealer in the Philippines. And so she worked for the family business. And so she wrote a pilot about that. Now, not everybody has a mom who's an arms dealer in the Philippines, right? Like, but everybody has an experience that is important to them, that meant something to them, that, hope like that story stemmed from, right? And so it's trying to excavate and figure out, like, why am I writing this story? Where did it come from? Why is it important to me? What do I bring to the table in terms of writing this?
And that's exactly it. I mean, it can be very mundane. Like, I was 13 when I first read X, and I've been, it moved me, and I've been, following this theme throughout my life, and this is my chance to explore it further. It doesn't have to be my, something as specific and crazy as my mom was an arms dealer in the Philippines. But the question that needs to be answered, it is, why am I driven to work so fucking hard on this thing? And it's a great question, because I'm sure everybody who's here, on a Zoom, like talking about pitching stories, are people that are really passionate about their stories. The emotional connection is there. Only good things are going to happen if you figure out how to communicate that in a paragraph.
All right. Should we show the deck and then we can answer questions?
Okay, great. Can I share my screen? Do I know how to do that? Did you send it to me?
I did email it to you. Pull it up first.
No. just have to pull it over to this. I think. Boop, boop.
This one. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Okay, share. All right, so this is something that we pitched. We unfortunately didn't sell it, but it's pretty extensive. It will kind of show you the structure. So this is a sci-fi show set in the world of geishas. So can you go to the next one? You have a cover page. And then, you can make it pretty if you need to. That was like a quote from a geisha. And then we did actually make a trailer for this. So we included that. My opinion on that is you don't need to do that. You don't need a script. You don't need a trailer. Maybe a script if you're a new writer, they might want to read it. But when we pitched things, they didn't even ask for scripts. So even though we had them, so
when we were first going the first few years, we would always write the pilot as well as do the deck, and there was no point in doing that.
So then you have the log line, right?
Can you read that out loud?
Yeah. So as the first Asian American geisha apprentice, Charlie, now known as Fukuya, immerses herself in the secretive flower and willow world, a culture that has been fastidiously preserved over hundreds of years. Reluctant to make waves at first, she's thrust into a web of corruption, secrets, and murder, and must solve the mystery of another rising foreign geisha's death. So 2 sentences. So then tone, see how you pick out the different comps, and then the gritty neo-noir of Blade Runner, cultural specificity of Memoirs of a Geisha as imagined by Agatha Christie.
That's rad. We all want to watch that.
So this is sort of the world, because there's a little bit of sci-fi angle into it. And then the tech angle. And then here's the theme page. So I picked out 3 different, usually it's like one theme. These are all related, but I did put a few different angles into it. And then you have their character descriptions. And yeah, more characters. And then I actually broke this out into episodes because they asked me to. So I did, but I also did have a version that was just one paragraph. And then futures, sometimes people have future season. That's not really fashionable anymore. I don't know. People don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I feel like it's not as much of an opportunity as a trap.
I think it's a really good idea to know if they ask you. So a lot of things, one really good pitch tip that somebody told me in terms of actually pitching it is always have 3 things that you want to say that are not in the pitch. And then if they ask a question that you don't know the answer to, say one of those things instead. I'll bring it back around to one of those things that you want to say.
That's really good.
But people will ask about future seasons. Sometimes they might be like, well, we want things that can sustain more seasons. What do you see? You got to have an answer for it. If you don't, that's fine. You can say, you know what, that's a really good question. I'll get back to you on it. And then you can follow up. That's fine too. But it's better to have an answer. So always know at least a little bit or have an answer for it. But you don't have to put it in your deck, I don't think, anymore. And then I put some inspiration stuff. So this was a very much more involved deck.
Yeah, you went to town on this, but there were a lot of questions from the team that some of these images are specifically responding to as you were going into it. God, it's really cool.
And I think too, it's this was the inspiration. There were actually women who were white who became geishas, right? So I think that's a cool part of it. And then, we did add the team at the end. So, that was my personal thing. And then sort of the companies, and then and that's it. Now we can answer questions for the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, I would say, oh, now I've done it. The going from that deck, specifically with Maiko, to the pitch, it was an interesting example of going from the document to the actual pitch. Winnie would start off her pitch with sort of a personal story of a time that she was, in a foreign land and around, a different culture, and how that experience, really shaped her and was, emotionally important and resonant for her, and then launched into how that's where our main character starts and how it goes, and would then go through sort of an exciting truncated version of the journey of the main character, and then land on the themes and say, and this, by doing this, what this story is talking about is X, Y, and Z, and along the way mentioning the comps.
And I think too, like you want to, like everybody's different, but I think everyone is nervous to be in front of executive. I think you just have to remember that they want to like you. They want to like your show. You're there. They read your log line. They saw your materials. They want to hear it. So that's like a win in itself. And knowing that, like, I don't know, I tell people this all the time because it's so hard. We live in a business of rejection and we're in a really tough time period. So like, just know that the more no's you get, the closer you are to a yes, because you have to collect no's in order to get a yes. So a no is not a no forever. A no is a no for this right now. But like, you have to just know that like, that is your job, is to go get no's, because that means you're getting into rooms. It means people are looking at your material. It means people are, interested, right? And you don't get to yes without lots of no's. Even top people, they get mostly no's. Okay, so I think just having that sort of mindset when you go in, like try to have fun with it. They want to know that you're like a personable, nice person to work with, and that like, make it fun. Like it should be fun. Like they should be entertained during the pitch. The worst thing you can do is go and just read off a paper flatly, right? So practice with lots of people, practice over and over again until you don't need your script. You can always have it. The great thing about pitching over Zoom is that you can have it and they don't know, right? Versus in the room. So definitely practice the point you basically don't need it. Sometimes I do make a bullet point version so that I'm not so wed to reading it. It's a little bit more loose.
I prefer the bullet point version too. So you write it first and then you reduce it to bullet points so that you're not literally reading off the page.
So how do you craft an elevator pitch for networking? That is a good question. I think an elevator pitch is really just your log line. So, if you've done your work crafting your log line to be like very interesting or like, like noisy and sticky and all those kinds of things, then like really you could just use your log line. You don't have that much time when you're sort of like, when somebody asks like, oh, what's it about? Like you want it to be short and punchy and interesting, right? And so that's something also you practice, but usually it's a log line. How do you reach out to and connect with people to get to the pitching stage? That is a really good question as well. There are podcast agents at every agency. They generally are the ones who like set up those kinds of meetings. Sometimes people just have relationships or reach out, through friends of friends, right? Like, so it's like, oh, well, my friend knows somebody from Wondery and they can vouch for me. That's another way to do it. I'm always a fan of like cold emailing. Like if you don't know somebody and you have a background in it, like then you just say, hey, I've done this, I made this show and it did this. Like I have another show. Do you want to hear it? Sometimes they are open to that. So it's always worth trying, again, the more you get yourself out there, like, even if you don't pitch there, like they might remember you, or maybe they say yes, like you don't know unless you ask. So there's multiple different ways to skin a cat.
There's one specific, again, sort of more technical thing that I learned from you, Winnie, is when you are sending that email that has the deck in it, you put certain elements in the email itself, right? So there's the title of the show,
log line,
and the log line, and then the deck. So
Yep.
Just so that they can see in the email.
If they have to open it to read it, they might not open it. So, and never send the deck if you don't know the person. Like always just send the log line, So there's like certain like courtesy things of like, if you don't know the person, like don't assume that they're gonna like, here's the script and here's the deck. Like just ask, hey, here, make it very short. This is my background. Here's a log line. I'm pitching it. Would you like to, I'd love to pitch it to you. And
that is their job to hear pitches.
It is their job. It is their job. Yeah.
How would you characterize the current state of fiction podcasting as a medium for marketing IP? It seems that for a while, folks were producing one season as an alternative to TV pilot. Or are there more opportunities to produce audio drama as a medium in itself? Well, yes and yes. Like, people still, I think, produce audio drama with an eye on the fact that they're building IP that could potentially move to other genres, right? Other media. So it could become a TV show.
Also less of a focus now, though. I think for a while, like, that was like the sell of podcast companies. They're like, hey, if you make it with us, we can make for IP, and then we can sell it to TV. Now, the reality of it is most of them don't sell to TV. If they do sell to TV, they don't get made. So like, it is more of like a, oh guys, we can make IP kind of thing than like a serious, like, yes, we're, that's why we're buying it. It's not like a reason to do anything anymore, right, is my point. But it is like an upside. It's an upside.
And there's a bit of a problem with the, that we've all, I think, experienced with just the nature of the delivery technology, this RSS feed and the different portals to that.
And IP's
RSS
intellectual
feed.
property.
Right. And so monetizing audio fiction when you're talking about a limited series is nearly impossible, because it would have to have such a massive audience to have, if you had 9 downloads. So, there is a point to the idea that we collectively, as the geniuses behind audio drama, need to figure out how to take advantage of what does exist in the delivery mechanism to extend the life of our RSS feeds so that they can potentially become something that will make money. I think if you look at early shows like Night Vale and Magnus Archives that just have lots and lots of episodes, that's a really good example of what works. It takes a long time to build up an audience. Audio drama is more intensive to make per minute than, a banter cast where it's 2 people just sitting around talking about movies or whatever. But it's also, it's the most beautiful art form in the world. I'm in love with it. So I think, this is really about today's topic was really about pitching a show in trying to get some help getting that made. And hopefully part of that would be some marketing money and some exposure from whatever network you're trying to sell to. We could do another day on the indie podcast and how to approach that as a design problem.
All right, we have one last question. Do we know why companies don't want to adapt podcasts into other media? It's not that they don't want to adapt podcasts into other media. Like, they will definitely buy a very successful podcast. It's just the development process. So a lot of times it comes with creators that don't have TV knowledge or don't have a background in that. So that becomes very difficult. It's like the development process for TV and film is also very fraught, right? So there's 1% of things that are bought to be developed get made, right? So it's just overall, it's not about podcasts. It's just the way that they do things in general.
Yeah, it's slow and weird. Do podcast companies have mandates on what they're looking for, like studios have for film and TV? Yes, and they're not the easiest things to get a hand on. That's a great reason to have an agent or a manager. That's sort of their job.
Nobody collects them like they do for film and TV. I don't think that I know of. We
should do that.
It's more like you have to do individual meetings with different companies to be like, hey, what are you looking for right now? And then that's how you know.
But you do have a sense based on what they have made and particularly what's been successful for them. Sometimes that's something you can't replicate, like in the case of Audible and all the James Patterson stuff. Like, oh, I'll just do a James Patterson. No, because it's kind of his brand. That's what's moving that stuff. But you do know with Audible, like, oh, a really contemporary take on a classic piece of fiction is something that they're always going to at least be interested in. So if you have a really novel take on one of the classics, and again, something that where you have a real personal connection to telling that story in a unique way, I think that's something that they would be interested in just based on what they've done in the past. So those mandates do shift around. Sometimes it's about what demographics people are trying to hit. Sometimes it's just about what they feel like their roster is lacking. But it's not easy to get your hands on or even get a straight answer. One exec at a company might have a different answer than another.
All right.
Wow, that was a lot.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alex and Winnie. We would love to see you back to talk about indie podcasting because it sounds like there's a definite interest for it. So
We would love that. We would love it. This is so much fun. And we just love this space and want to share the knowledge. We want more fiction podcasts, more creators,
Make
more getting made.
good stuff. I need shows to listen to.
Yeah.
I've listened to everything. So make more good stuff.
Thank you so much for having us, Nancy.
absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for everybody who came.
Thank you.
All right. See you
Next
soon.
time.
See you next time.
Bye.